My name is Captain Sarah Mitchell. Last Tuesday, my brother Marcus threw my army dress uniform into the backyard fire pit, calling it a costume for wannabe heroes. 3 hours later, General Patricia Hawkins called to inform me that I had been selected to receive the Medal of Honor for extraordinary valor in Afghanistan. I just smiled and made one phone call that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of our family home in Cedar Falls, Iowa, casting long shadows across the breakfast table, where I sat in my Army combat uniform. The familiar weight of the fabric, earned through 4 years of service and 3 deployments, felt heavier than usual as I prepared for what I knew would be a difficult conversation with my family. I had returned home on emergency leave to attend my father's funeral, a man who had served 22 years in the Marines before building a successful construction business that employed half the town. Dad understood sacrifice, duty, and the price of serving something greater than yourself. My brother Marcus had inherited the business but never understood the values that built it. At 28, I had already served longer than many soldiers serve in their entire careers. My record included deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where I had led infantry units through some of the most challenging operations of recent conflicts. The ribbons on my uniform told stories of courage under fire, successful missions that saved civilian lives, and leadership that earned respect from soldiers who followed me into danger. Marcus sat across from me at the same table where we had eaten countless childhood meals, but the boy who once looked up to his big sister had been replaced by a man who viewed my military service as an abandonment of family responsibilities. At 31, he commanded respect in Cedar Falls as the owner of Mitchell Construction, but he had never ventured beyond the county lines or challenged himself with anything more demanding than a difficult building project. "So when are you finally coming home for good?" Marcus asked, his tone carrying the familiar edge of resentment that had characterized our conversations for the past 3 years. "Dad's gone now. The business needs someone who actually understands what matters." I looked around the kitchen that held so many memories of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and quiet conversations with Dad about duty, honor, and the importance of serving something larger than personal comfort. The American flag that Dad had flown every day still hung from the front porch, and his military decorations remained displayed in the den, testament to values that had shaped our family for generations. "Marcus, my commitment to the Army isn't finished," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I have responsibilities to my soldiers and missions that require my leadership. This isn't about abandoning family. It's about fulfilling obligations that Dad would have understood." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening with the kind of frustration that comes from years of feeling abandoned by someone whose choices he could never comprehend. Dad's understanding is what got him killed on that construction site. He was working 16-hour days trying to keep the business running, while his daughter played soldier on the other side of the world. The accusation hit like a physical blow, but I had learned to control my emotional responses through years of military training and leadership responsibilities. Dad's death in a workplace accident had occurred while I was deployed in Afghanistan, leading a platoon through operations that prevented terrorist attacks on civilian populations. The guilt of missing his final months was something I carried every day, but I knew he would never have wanted me to abandon my duty to return home. "Dad was proud of my service," I said quietly. "He understood that some responsibilities transcend personal comfort or family convenience. He taught me that honor means keeping commitments, even when they require sacrifice." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the backyard where Dad had taught us to throw footballs and built the treehouse that still stood in the old oak tree. "Honor doesn't pay the bills, Sarah. Honor doesn't keep a business running or take care of Mom when she needs help. Your honor is a luxury that other people pay for." I understood Marcus's frustration even though I disagreed with his perspective. He had watched me leave for military training immediately after college graduation, missing family gatherings, holidays, and important milestones, while pursuing what he saw as selfish ambitions disguised as patriotic duty. From his perspective, I had chosen strangers over family, adventure over responsibility, and personal fulfillment over communal obligation. But Marcus had never witnessed the moments that defined military service. He had never held a dying soldier while calling for medical evacuation, never made split-second decisions that determined whether civilians lived or died, never felt the weight of responsibility for young men and women who trusted their lives to his leadership and judgment. The phone rang, interrupting our tense conversation. Mom's voice carried from the living room as she answered, her tone shifting from casual greeting to surprised recognition. "Sarah, it's for you. Someone from the Army." I excused myself and took the call in Dad's study, surrounded by his military memorabilia and the photographs that documented his own service in Vietnam and Lebanon. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel James Patterson, my commanding officer, calling with news that would change everything. "Captain Mitchell, I need to inform you that your actions during Operation Thunderstrike have been submitted for consideration for the Medal of Honor. The review process is ongoing, but preliminary findings indicate strong support for the recommendation." The words seemed to echo in the quiet study as I processed their significance. Operation Thunderstrike had been a counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan, where my platoon had prevented a coordinated attack on a civilian marketplace. The operation had required split-second decision-making under intense fire, and several of my soldiers had been wounded while we evacuated over 200 civilians from the target area. "Sir, I was just doing my job," I replied, the standard response that military training instills for situations involving recognition or awards. My soldiers performed extraordinarily, and any recognition should acknowledge their contributions. Colonel Patterson's voice carried the warmth of someone who had observed my leadership for several years. "Captain, your actions saved hundreds of civilian lives and prevented a terrorist attack that would have destabilized the entire region. The Medal of Honor recognizes extraordinary valor, and your leadership during Thunderstrike exemplified everything this award represents." I returned to the kitchen where Marcus was cleaning coffee cups with the methodical precision he applied to all routine tasks. His movements carried the frustration of someone who felt trapped by circumstances beyond his control, managing a business he had never wanted, while watching his sister pursue adventures he could never understand. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting that calls from the Army typically meant deployments, extensions, or other developments that would take me further from family responsibilities. "Just routine communication," I replied, uncertain about how to share news that I could barely process myself. The Medal of Honor represented recognition that fewer than 4,000 people had received in American history, but I knew Marcus would view it as another symbol of my commitment to institutions that competed with family obligations. That evening, as we sorted through Dad's belongings in preparation for the estate settlement, Marcus discovered my dress uniform hanging in the guest room closet. The blue jacket with its array of ribbons and decorations represented 4 years of service, 3 deployments, and leadership experiences that had shaped me into someone Dad would have recognized as worthy of the values he had instilled. Marcus held the uniform at arm's length, studying the ribbons that told stories he had never heard and represented experiences he could never share. "This is what's more important than family?" he asked, his voice carrying years of accumulated resentment. "This costume that makes you feel special while the people who actually love you struggle alone?" I watched my brother examine the uniform that represented everything I had worked to achieve, the tangible evidence of service that had tested my courage, leadership, and commitment to principles larger than personal comfort. Each ribbon represented specific operations, training achievements, or recognition for performance that had earned respect from soldiers who depended on my judgment in life and death situations. "Marcus, that uniform represents service to country and commitment to values that Dad understood and respected. It's not about feeling special. It's about accepting responsibility for protecting people who cannot protect themselves." Marcus's expression hardened as he continued examining the uniform, his frustration finally reaching the breaking point that had been building for years. "Well, maybe it's time you chose what really matters." Quote. I had no way of knowing that within hours, Marcus would make a decision that would test everything I believed about family, forgiveness, and the true meaning of honor. The foundation of service that had sustained me through 4 years of military challenges was about to face its greatest test, not in combat overseas, but in the backyard of my childhood home. The dress uniform hanging in that closet represented more than career achievements or professional recognition. It embodied the transformation of a small-town girl who had chosen to serve something larger than herself, who had earned the respect of soldiers in combat, and who had demonstrated the kind of leadership that saves lives and protects innocent people from violence. As I prepared for bed in my childhood room, surrounded by memories of simpler times when Marcus and I shared dreams and adventures, I could not have imagined that the next morning would bring both the destruction of something precious and news that would validate every sacrifice I had made in service to my country. The foundation of service was complete, built through years of training, deployment, and leadership under fire. Tomorrow would test whether that foundation was strong enough to withstand the betrayal of someone who was supposed to understand its value better than anyone else. The journey that had begun with a young woman's decision to serve her country was about to reach a crossroads that would define not only my relationship with my family, but my understanding of what honor truly means when tested by the people we love most. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Iowa morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that carried memories of childhood adventures and promised changes that could not be reversed. I woke in my old bedroom at 05:00 hours, a habit ingrained through years of military discipline that had become as natural as breathing. The house remained quiet around me, but my mind was already processing the conversation with Colonel Patterson and the implications of his call. The Medal of Honor recommendation represented recognition that transcended personal achievement. It acknowledged leadership decisions made under extreme pressure, when the lives of soldiers and civilians depended on split-second judgments that could determine who lived and who died. As I lay in the familiar darkness of my childhood room, surrounded by volleyball trophies and high school photographs, I reflected on the journey that had transformed a small-town athlete into a combat leader. My military education had begun at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where I learned that leadership was not about commanding authority but about earning the trust of people who would follow you into impossible situations. The Academy's rigorous academic and military training had challenged every assumption I held about my own capabilities and limitations. I discovered that true strength came not from physical prowess or intellectual superiority, but from the willingness to accept responsibility for outcomes that affected other people's lives. During my first deployment to Iraq, I served as a second lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division, where I learned that textbook strategies often failed when confronted with the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat operations. My platoon sergeant, Master Sergeant Robert Chen, had taken me aside after my first patrol and delivered advice that shaped my understanding of military leadership. "Lieutenant, your soldiers don't care about your West Point education or your family background," Chen had said with the directness that characterized the best non-commissioned officers. "They care about whether you can make decisions that bring them home alive. Everything else is just decoration." Chen's mentorship taught me that effective leadership required understanding the human dynamics that governed small unit operations. Soldiers performed extraordinarily when they trusted their leaders and believed their lives had value beyond tactical objectives. Creating that trust required demonstrating competence under pressure, making decisions that prioritize soldier welfare, and accepting personal responsibility for both successes and failures. My second deployment to Afghanistan as a first lieutenant had provided opportunities to apply Chen's lessons in increasingly complex operational environments. I commanded a rifle platoon responsible for security operations in Kandahar province, where insurgent activity required constant vigilance and adaptive tactical responses. The deployment taught me that courage was not the absence of fear but the ability to function effectively despite being terrified. During one particularly intense firefight, my platoon had been pinned down by sniper fire while escorting a medical convoy through a mountain pass. The tactical situation required someone to advance across open ground to eliminate the sniper position, a maneuver that carried significant risk of casualties. I made the decision to lead the assault personally, understanding that asking soldiers to accept risks that I was unwilling to share would undermine the trust that sustained unit cohesion. The assault succeeded, but the experience taught me that leadership decisions often involve choosing between competing risks rather than selecting obviously correct solutions. My soldiers' safety depended on my ability to assess complex situations quickly and choose courses of action that balanced mission accomplishment with force protection. These decisions could not be delegated or delayed, and their consequences affected real people who depended on my judgment. My promotion to captain and assignment as a company executive officer had expanded my responsibilities to include logistics coordination, personnel management, and operational planning for larger formations. I learned that senior leadership required understanding how individual decisions affected broader organizational objectives, and how resource allocation decisions influenced unit effectiveness and morale. The third deployment to Afghanistan as a company commander had represented the culmination of my military education. Leading 120 soldiers through counterinsurgency operations required integrating everything I had learned about tactical leadership, strategic thinking, and human dynamics. My company's area of operations included villages where civilian populations were caught between insurgent intimidation and coalition force security requirements. Operation Thunderstrike had emerged from intelligence, indicating that insurgent forces were planning a coordinated attack on a civilian marketplace in Helmand province. The attack was designed to kill large numbers of innocent people and demonstrate insurgent capability to strike at the heart of government-controlled areas. My company received orders to prevent the attack while minimizing civilian casualties and avoiding collateral damage that could undermine local support for coalition operations. The operational environment presented multiple challenges that required innovative tactical solutions. The marketplace was located in a densely populated area where conventional military responses could cause civilian casualties. Intelligence indicated that insurgent forces had positioned themselves among civilian populations, using human shields to complicate coalition targeting decisions. Time constraints prevented extensive planning or reconnaissance that might have provided better tactical options. I developed a plan that involved dividing my company into multiple elements that could approach the marketplace from different directions, while maintaining coordination through advanced communication systems. Each element had specific responsibilities for civilian evacuation, insurgent neutralization, and area security. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution under conditions where mistakes could result in friendly fire incidents or civilian casualties. The execution phase began before dawn on a morning that would define my understanding of military leadership and personal courage. My soldiers moved through narrow streets and crowded buildings while maintaining communication and coordination, despite enemy fire and civilian chaos. The insurgents had anticipated military intervention and prepared defensive positions that maximized their tactical advantages while limiting coalition response options. During the most intense phase of the operation, I made decisions that saved civilian lives but exposed my soldiers to additional risks. When insurgent fire threatened a group of children who were trapped in a building near the marketplace, I ordered my soldiers to advance across open ground to provide covering fire for civilian evacuation. The decision resulted in 2 of my soldiers being wounded, but it prevented civilian casualties that would have undermined the entire operation's strategic objectives. The successful completion of Operation Thunderstrike had prevented hundreds of civilian deaths while neutralizing a significant insurgent threat. My soldiers' performance during the operation exemplified the training, discipline, and courage that define the best traditions of military service. The operation's success resulted from months of preparation, rigorous training, and the development of trust between leaders and soldiers that enabled extraordinary performance under extreme pressure. Colonel Patterson's recommendation for the Medal of Honor acknowledged not just the tactical success of Operation Thunderstrike, but the leadership decisions that prioritize civilian protection and soldier welfare while accomplishing mission objectives. The recommendation recognized that military leadership involved moral choices that extended beyond tactical considerations to include broader questions about the appropriate use of military force and the protection of innocent people. As I prepared for breakfast with my family, I reflected on the education that had transformed me from a small-town athlete into a combat leader capable of making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. This education had occurred not in classrooms or training facilities, but in the crucible of actual combat operations, where theoretical knowledge was tested against real-world complexity and human chaos. The leadership lessons I had learned through 4 years of military service could not be communicated through simple explanations or casual conversations. They required understanding developed through shared experiences of danger, sacrifice, and mutual dependence that created bonds stronger than family relationships. My soldiers had taught me that true leadership emerged not from authority or rank, but from the willingness to accept responsibility for outcomes that affected other people's lives. Marcus's criticism of my military service reflected his inability to understand the education that had shaped my character and defined my understanding of duty, honor, and sacrifice. His perspective was limited by experiences that had never tested his courage or required him to make decisions under life and death pressure. Our father would have understood the transformation that military service had created, but Marcus lacked the framework for comprehending leadership lessons learned through combat experience. The hidden education that had prepared me for Medal of Honor recognition could not be explained through words alone. It required understanding developed through years of training, deployment, and leadership responsibilities that challenged every assumption about personal limitations and capabilities. This education had created the foundation for decisions that saved lives and protected innocent people from violence, but its value could only be appreciated by those who understood the weight of responsibility that accompanied military leadership. As I descended the stairs toward what would become a confrontation that tested everything I believed about family, forgiveness, and the true meaning of honor, I carried with me the lessons learned through years of service that had prepared me for challenges that extended far beyond military operations. The hidden education was complete, but its most important test was about to begin in the kitchen, where my brother waited with resentment that had been building for years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen table as I joined Marcus for what would become our final breakfast as siblings who shared the same understanding of family loyalty. The tension between us had been building for years, but the funeral arrangements and estate settlement had brought our fundamental differences into sharp focus. I approached this conversation with the same analytical mindset that had served me during complex military operations, recognizing that family dynamics often required the same strategic thinking as battlefield leadership. Marcus sat behind the Cedar Falls Gazette, its headlines focused on local business developments and high school football scores that reflected the insular world he had never chosen to leave. His morning routine included reviewing construction contracts, checking weather forecasts, and planning work schedules that employed 43 local residents. The responsibility for maintaining jobs and supporting families weighed heavily on his shoulders, creating pressure that I had observed but never fully understood until returning home. During my years of military service, I had developed sophisticated skills in reading environmental cues, understanding group dynamics, and predicting how different personalities would respond under stress. These observational capabilities had proven essential for leading soldiers through combat operations, where misreading human behavior could result in casualties or mission failure. Now I applied these same analytical frameworks to understanding my own family relationships and the sources of Marcus's resentment toward my military career. Marcus's perspective on my service reflected broader community attitudes about military commitment that I had encountered throughout my childhood in Cedar Falls. The town valued practical contributions over abstract principles, immediate results over long-term investments, and visible accomplishments over distant achievements. Military service was respected in theory, but often viewed as impractical when it interfered with local responsibilities and family obligations. I observed how Marcus's body language and conversation patterns revealed deep frustration with what he perceived as my abandonment of family duties during critical periods. His shoulders carried tension that increased whenever our conversation touched on military topics, and his responses became increasingly defensive when I mentioned operational responsibilities or deployment requirements. These physical indicators suggested emotional stress that extended beyond simple disagreement about career choices. The strategic observation skills I had developed through military training allowed me to recognize that Marcus's criticism of my service masked deeper concerns about his own choices and limitations. He had inherited a successful business from our father, but had never tested himself against challenges that extended beyond familiar environments or proven capabilities. My military achievements represented adventures and accomplishments that highlighted the constraints of his own carefully controlled existence. During breakfast preparation, I noticed how Marcus moved through the kitchen with efficient precision that reflected years of managing complex construction projects under deadline pressure. His organizational skills and attention to detail would have translated effectively to military logistics or operational planning, but he had never chosen to explore possibilities that required leaving Cedar Falls or accepting risks that could not be calculated through familiar frameworks. Marcus's conversation revealed sophisticated understanding of business management, personnel psychology, and strategic planning that he applied to construction operations without recognizing their broader applications. He discussed employee motivation techniques, resource optimization strategies, and client relationship management with expertise that demonstrated natural leadership capabilities. His analytical insights about local economic conditions and market trends showed strategic thinking that rivaled military planning processes. I began to understand that Marcus's resentment stemmed not from lack of capability or intelligence, but from choices that had limited his experiences to local contexts, while his sister pursued challenges that tested her capabilities against international standards. He had watched me develop skills and earn recognition through military service, while he remained constrained by geographical and professional boundaries that felt increasingly restrictive. The observation process revealed that our family conflict reflected broader tensions between local commitment and global service, immediate responsibility and long-term investment, practical contribution and principled action. Marcus represented the values of community stability and family loyalty that sustain small towns like Cedar Falls. I represented the values of national service and personal growth that required accepting risks and responsibilities beyond familiar environments. During our conversation about estate settlement, I observed how Marcus's expertise in legal and financial matters had grown through years of managing complex business operations. He navigated property transfers, tax implications, and inheritance procedures with confidence that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of systems and processes. His analytical capabilities in these areas exceeded my own knowledge and experience, highlighting competencies that military training had not developed. Marcus's discussion of employee relationships revealed deep understanding of human motivation and group dynamics that he had developed through years of managing construction crews. He described techniques for maintaining morale during difficult projects, resolving conflicts between workers with different backgrounds and personalities, and motivating teams to exceed performance expectations. His leadership insights in these contexts demonstrated capabilities that would have been valuable in military environments. I recognized that Marcus's criticism of my military career reflected frustration with his own unrealized potential rather than genuine disapproval of service principles. He possessed analytical capabilities, leadership skills, and strategic thinking that could have been applied to broader contexts, but he had chosen security and familiarity over challenge and growth. My achievements highlighted possibilities he had never pursued and reminded him of paths he had decided not to explore. The strategic observation process also revealed positive aspects of Marcus's character that had been obscured by our recent conflicts. His commitment to maintaining employment for local residents demonstrated genuine concern for community welfare. His dedication to preserving our father's business legacy showed respect for family traditions and values. His assumption of responsibility for our mother's care reflected loyalty and practical love that exceeded my own contributions during periods of deployment. I observed how Marcus's daily routines included checking on elderly neighbors, supporting local charities, and maintaining relationships with high school classmates who had remained in Cedar Falls. His social network provided stability and mutual support that created genuine value for community members who depended on his reliability and commitment. These contributions represented different forms of service that deserved recognition and respect. The analytical framework I applied to understanding Marcus's perspective also illuminated my own limitations and blind spots. My military service had provided extraordinary experiences and professional recognition, but it had also isolated me from family responsibilities and community connections that sustained people like Marcus who chose local commitment over global adventure. My achievements came at costs that affected other people who had to compensate for my absence during critical periods. Military training had taught me to evaluate situations from multiple perspectives and consider how different stakeholders would be affected by various courses of action. Applying this analytical approach to our family dynamics revealed that both Marcus and I had made choices that reflected legitimate values but created tensions when those values conflicted with competing priorities and responsibilities. The observation process had taught me that effective leadership required understanding different viewpoints and finding ways to bridge competing interests through creative solutions that honored multiple priorities. The skills I had developed through military service could be applied to family relationships if I approached them with the same systematic thinking and strategic patience that had proven effective in combat operations. As our breakfast conversation progressed toward the confrontation that would test everything I believed about family loyalty and forgiveness, I carried with me insights developed through years of observing human behavior under stress. The strategic observation phase was complete, but its most important application was about to begin, when Marcus made decisions that would challenge my understanding of brotherhood and force me to choose between competing definitions of honor and duty. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows illuminated a scene that appeared peaceful but contained tensions that had been building for years. Marcus finished reading the newspaper and began discussing his plans for handling our father's estate, unaware that his next actions would create a crisis that tested everything we both believed about family, loyalty, and the price of pursuing individual achievement over collective responsibility. The afternoon hours following our tense breakfast revealed patterns of behavior and communication that had governed our family dynamics for decades. As I sorted through our father's belongings in the attic, methodically organizing documents and memorabilia according to the systematic approach that military service had ingrained, I began to recognize recurring themes that explained the persistent tensions between Marcus and myself. Military intelligence training had taught me that understanding patterns required analyzing data across extended time periods rather than focusing on isolated incidents. Individual conflicts often reflected deeper systemic issues that manifested through multiple interactions and decisions. Applying this analytical framework to our family history revealed cycles of misunderstanding and resentment that had been repeating since childhood. The first pattern involved what I categorized as achievement recognition discrepancy. Throughout our childhood, Marcus had consistently received acknowledgement for practical accomplishments that produced immediate, visible results. His success in local athletics, academic performance in subjects directly applicable to business management, and early demonstration of leadership capabilities within familiar social contexts had earned praise from parents, teachers, and community members who valued concrete achievements. My own accomplishments had often been more abstract or distant from immediate family experience. Academic excellence in subjects like international relations and strategic studies, athletic performance in individual sports rather than team activities, and interest in challenges that extended beyond local contexts, had received polite acknowledgement but lacked the enthusiastic recognition that Marcus's achievements generated within our community environment. The pattern had intensified during high school when Marcus became captain of the football team, while I focused on academic preparation for military academy admission. The community celebrated Marcus's leadership of a team that represented Cedar Falls in regional competitions, while my acceptance to West Point was viewed as an impressive but somewhat impractical achievement that would take me away from family and community responsibilities. This recognition discrepancy had created a foundation for resentment that persisted through our adult careers. Marcus's success in building and expanding our father's construction business earned consistent acknowledgement from family members and community leaders who could directly observe his contributions. My military achievements occurred in distant locations and involved responsibilities that family members could not fully understand or appreciate. The second pattern involved sacrifice attribution imbalance. Marcus had consistently assumed additional family responsibilities to compensate for my absence during military training and deployments. When our grandmother required extended care during her final illness, Marcus had managed her medical appointments and daily assistance while I remained deployed overseas. When our father needed surgery and rehabilitation following a workplace injury, Marcus had overseen his recovery while coordinating business operations to maintain employee paychecks. These sacrifice patterns had created a dynamic where Marcus viewed himself as bearing disproportionate responsibility for family welfare while I pursued personal ambitions disguised as patriotic duty. From his perspective, military service represented a socially acceptable form of abandonment that allowed me to avoid difficult family obligations while earning recognition for adventures that ordinary people could not pursue. My own understanding of sacrifice differed fundamentally from Marcus's assessment. Military service had required accepting risks and responsibilities that extended far beyond personal comfort or family convenience. The decision to accept deployments that separated me from family during critical periods reflected commitment to duties that protected innocent people and served national security interests. These sacrifices affected multiple stakeholders beyond our immediate family and contributed to objectives that transcended local community concerns. The pattern analysis revealed that both Marcus and I had made legitimate sacrifices that served different but important purposes. His sacrifices had maintained family stability and community connections during periods when my military obligations prevented direct participation. My sacrifices had served broader national security objectives and protected civilian populations in conflict zones. The tension arose from competing definitions of which sacrifices deserved recognition and which responsibilities took precedence during periods of conflict. The third pattern involved communication style incompatibility. Marcus's communication preferences reflected business management approaches that emphasized efficiency, direct action, and measurable outcomes. His conversations focused on immediate problems, practical solutions, and implementation strategies that could be executed within defined timelines. This communication style had proven effective for managing construction projects and employee relationships that required clear direction and accountability. My communication style had been shaped by military planning processes that emphasized comprehensive analysis, multiple contingency options, and strategic thinking that considered long-term implications. Military operations required extensive coordination between diverse stakeholders, careful consideration of unintended consequences, and decision-making frameworks that balanced competing priorities. This analytical approach had proven essential for successful mission accomplishment, but often appeared indecisive or overly complex to people who preferred direct action. The communication incompatibility had created frustration for both of us during important family discussions. Marcus interpreted my analytical approach as avoidance of commitment or attempts to rationalize selfish decisions. I interpreted his direct communication style as oversimplification of complex issues or unwillingness to consider broader implications of family decisions. The fourth pattern involved success metric divergence. Marcus measured success through tangible outcomes that could be observed and quantified within local contexts. Business growth, employee retention, community recognition, and family stability represented meaningful achievements that demonstrated practical value and contributed to stakeholder welfare. His success metrics emphasized immediate results and visible contributions that could be appreciated by people who shared his geographic and social environment. My success metrics had been shaped by military performance standards that emphasized mission accomplishment, soldier welfare, and strategic objectives that often remained classified or distant from public recognition. Military achievements were measured through operational effectiveness, leadership performance under pressure, and contributions to national security objectives that civilian populations could not fully understand or appreciate. This divergence in success metrics had created a fundamental disconnect in how we evaluated our respective career choices and life priorities. Marcus viewed his business achievements as concrete contributions that justified pride and recognition, while regarding my military accomplishments as abstract pursuits that served distant objectives at the expense of immediate family responsibilities. The pattern recognition analysis revealed that our family conflicts reflected broader tensions between local commitment and global service, immediate responsibility and long-term strategic thinking, practical achievement and principled action. These tensions were not unique to our family but represented common challenges faced by military families who must balance competing obligations and different definitions of duty and honor. Understanding these patterns provided insights into potential strategies for addressing our underlying conflicts rather than simply managing their surface manifestations. Effective resolution would require acknowledging the legitimacy of both perspectives while developing communication approaches that bridged our different styles and success metrics. The analysis also revealed that our father had served as an essential mediator who understood both local business responsibilities and military service obligations. His own Marine Corps experience had provided credibility with Marcus regarding practical leadership challenges, while his business success had demonstrated the civilian applications of military training and discipline. His death had eliminated the family member who could translate between our different worldviews and help us appreciate each other's contributions. As evening approached and Marcus prepared to conclude his workday by reviewing tomorrow's construction schedules, I recognized that our confrontation was approaching a critical phase. The pattern recognition analysis had provided strategic insights into the sources of our conflict, but understanding the patterns would not automatically resolve the tensions that had been building for years. The systematic observation had revealed that Marcus's decision to destroy my uniform would represent the culmination of patterns that had been developing since childhood. His action would reflect years of accumulated frustration with what he perceived as my abandonment of family responsibilities in pursuit of personal recognition. The destruction would be both symbolic and practical, eliminating the physical representation of achievements that had separated us while forcing a confrontation that could not be avoided through deployment or duty assignments. My response to Marcus's action would determine whether these patterns continued to govern our relationship or whether we could develop new approaches that honored both local commitment and global service, immediate responsibility and long-term strategic thinking, practical achievement and principled action. The pattern recognition phase was complete, but its most important application lay ahead when understanding family dynamics would be tested against the reality of irreversible actions and their consequences for relationships that had been strained beyond traditional repair mechanisms. The discovery that would change everything began with a simple task that should have taken 15 minutes. While organizing our father's office files for the estate attorney, I encountered a locked filing cabinet that Marcus had overlooked during his initial inventory of business documents. The cabinet contained personal papers that our father had kept separate from his business records, including military correspondence, family photographs, and documents that revealed aspects of his life that neither Marcus nor I had fully understood. The first folder contained correspondence between our father and military officials spanning the past 4 years of my service. Every commendation letter, promotion announcement, and operational summary that the Army had sent to next-of-kin notification addresses had been carefully preserved and organized chronologically. Our father had maintained detailed records of my military career that demonstrated far greater knowledge of my service record than he had ever revealed during our conversations. Among these official documents, I discovered handwritten notes in our father's distinctive script that provided commentary on my achievements and expressed pride that he had never communicated directly. One note, dated after my promotion to captain, read, "Sarah demonstrates the kind of leadership under pressure that separates exceptional officers from ordinary soldiers. Her ability to make life and death decisions while protecting civilian populations reflects values that the Marine Corps taught me to respect above all other considerations." Another note, written following my second deployment to Afghanistan, revealed his deeper understanding of military service and its personal costs. Sarah's commitment to her soldiers and mission represents the finest traditions of military leadership. The sacrifices she makes to protect innocent people and serve national security interests honor the principles that define American military service. Marcus struggles to understand these commitments because he has never been tested by situations that require choosing between personal comfort and duty to others. The discovery that our father had monitored my military career with such attention and pride contradicted the narrative that Marcus had constructed about family priorities and parental expectations. Our father had not merely tolerated my military service as Marcus had suggested, but had followed my achievements with the informed perspective of someone who understood the challenges and responsibilities of military leadership. The second folder contained documentation that revealed our father's efforts to help Marcus understand the value and significance of military service. I found copies of articles about military operations in Afghanistan that our father had printed and annotated with explanations of tactical challenges and leadership requirements. These materials suggested that he had attempted to educate Marcus about the complexities of modern military operations and the skills required for effective combat leadership. One particularly significant document was a draft letter that our father had written to Marcus but apparently never sent. The letter, dated 6 months before his death, addressed the tensions between his children and attempted to explain why both forms of service deserved recognition and respect. "Marcus, Your dedication to maintaining our family business and supporting local employment represents exactly the kind of community leadership that builds strong foundations for American prosperity. Your practical skills and commitment to immediate responsibilities serve essential purposes that deserve pride and recognition. However, your sister's military service protects the broader security environment that allows businesses like ours to operate safely and communities like Cedar Falls to prosper without external threats. Both forms of service require courage, sacrifice, and commitment to principles larger than personal convenience. The letter continued with specific examples of my military achievements that our father had researched independently. Sarah's leadership during Operation Thunderstrike prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of innocent civilians and destabilized the entire region. Her decisions under extreme pressure saved lives and demonstrated the kind of moral courage that defines the best traditions of American military service. These achievements deserve recognition from family members who benefit from the security that her service provides. The final paragraph of the unsent letter addressed the fundamental issue that had created tension between Marcus and myself. I understand your frustration with Sarah's absence during family crises, but I hope you can appreciate that her obligations to her soldiers and mission sometimes require accepting personal costs that serve larger purposes. The same principles that drove me to serve in the Marines, and that guide your commitment to our employees and community, motivate Sarah's dedication to protecting innocent people and serving national security interests. Different forms of service require different sacrifices, but they all deserve respect when they reflect genuine commitment to helping others. The third folder contained financial documents that revealed another dimension of our father's support for my military career that neither Marcus nor I had discovered. He had established a trust fund specifically designated for supporting my transition to civilian career when my military service concluded. The fund contained detailed investment records and growth projections that demonstrated years of careful financial planning designed to provide security and opportunities after military retirement. Accompanying the trust documentation was a letter explaining his reasoning. Military service provides extraordinary leadership experience and personal development opportunities, but it requires accepting financial limitations that can affect long-term security. This fund is designed to ensure that Sarah's commitment to military service does not prevent her from pursuing civilian opportunities that match her capabilities and interests when she completes her military obligations. The financial planning documents revealed that our father had consulted with financial advisors who specialized in military career transitions and had researched civilian career opportunities that would utilize the leadership skills and strategic thinking that military service develops. His planning had considered various scenarios for my post-military career, including business ownership, corporate leadership positions, and government service opportunities that would apply my military experience to civilian contexts. The discovery of this financial support contradicted Marcus's assertion that our father had viewed my military service as impractical or inconsistent with family priorities. The trust fund represented significant personal investment in supporting my career choices and ensuring that military service enhanced rather than limited my long-term opportunities. The fourth folder contained correspondence between our father and other military families in the Cedar Falls area. I had been unaware that he had maintained relationships with parents whose children were serving in various branches of military service. The letters revealed a support network where military families shared experiences, concerns, and pride in their children's service. One letter from the mother of a soldier who had served in my unit during our first deployment to Afghanistan provided specific details about my leadership performance. Your daughter's reputation among soldiers and officers in her unit reflects exceptional competence and genuine concern for soldier welfare. My son credits Captain Mitchell with training and leadership that prepared his unit for combat operations and kept them focused during extremely dangerous missions. Her soldiers trust her judgment because she consistently demonstrates that their lives and welfare are her primary concerns. The letter continued with operational details that our father had never shared with Marcus or me. During the firefight at Forward Operating Base Wilson, your daughter made tactical decisions that saved several soldiers' lives while accomplishing mission objectives under extreme pressure. Her ability to coordinate medical evacuation while maintaining unit cohesion prevented casualties that could have resulted from less experienced leadership. These are the kinds of decisions that separate exceptional officers from ordinary soldiers. The correspondence revealed that our father had maintained detailed knowledge of my military performance through informal networks of military families who shared information about their children's service. His understanding of my achievements and challenges had been far more comprehensive than either Marcus or I had realized, and his pride in my service had been informed by specific knowledge of my leadership performance rather than general family loyalty. The fifth folder contained planning documents for a surprise celebration that our father had been organizing to commemorate my military achievements when I returned from my current deployment. The celebration plans included arrangements for recognizing my service at a community event that would have educated Cedar Falls residents about modern military operations and the significance of my contributions to national security. The planning documents revealed that our father had been working with local veterans organizations to develop presentations that would explain the strategic importance of operations like Thunderstrike and the leadership challenges involved in modern military missions. The celebration would have provided opportunities for community members to understand military service in contemporary contexts, rather than relying on historical perspectives that did not reflect current operational realities. The discovery of these celebration plans demonstrated that our father had been actively working to bridge the gap between military service and community understanding that had contributed to tensions between Marcus and myself. His efforts to educate local residents about modern military operations reflected his recognition that public appreciation for military service required current knowledge, rather than abstract patriotic sentiment. As afternoon shadows lengthened across our father's office, I realized that these discoveries fundamentally altered my understanding of family dynamics and the sources of conflict between Marcus and myself. Our father had not been neutral in evaluating our respective career choices, but had actively supported both military service and business leadership, while working to help each of us appreciate the other's contributions. The crucial discovery revealed that much of the tension between Marcus and myself had resulted from communication failures rather than fundamental disagreements about values or priorities. Our father had understood the legitimacy of both perspectives, but had not succeeded in sharing his insights with us before his death eliminated the possibility of family conversations that might have resolved our conflicts. The documentation also revealed that my Medal of Honor recommendation would have been the culmination of recognition that our father had been anticipating and preparing to celebrate. His death had prevented him from witnessing the achievement that would validate everything he had understood about the value and significance of my military service. As I prepared to share these discoveries with Marcus, I recognized that the information would either bridge our differences or intensify his resentment, depending on how he interpreted our father's dual support for both of our career choices. The crucial discovery phase had provided insights that could transform our relationship, but the outcome would depend on Marcus's willingness to reconsider his assumptions about family priorities and parental expectations. The moment of revelation was approaching, and the success or failure of family reconciliation would depend on whether years of accumulated resentment could be overcome by evidence of our father's genuine pride in both of his children's achievements, and his recognition that different forms of service could coexist within the same family value system. The weight of discovery required careful consideration of strategic alternatives before taking action that could not be reversed. Military planning had taught me that possessing critical information was only valuable when combined with thoughtful analysis of how that information could be utilized to achieve optimal outcomes. The documents I had discovered in our father's office represented intelligence that could transform my relationship with Marcus, but their effectiveness would depend entirely on the strategic framework I employed for sharing these revelations. I spent the evening hours in our father's study, surrounded by evidence of his dual support for both Marcus and myself, developing what military planners would recognize as a comprehensive communication strategy. The objective was clear: bridge the fundamental misunderstandings that had created years of resentment, while honoring the legitimate concerns and perspectives that both Marcus and I had developed through our different life experiences. The strategic analysis began with stakeholder assessment, a process that military operations require before implementing any significant initiative. Marcus represented the primary stakeholder, whose cooperation was essential for family reconciliation, but his psychological state and emotional defenses would significantly influence how he received new information about our father's perspectives and priorities. Marcus had constructed a narrative framework over several years that positioned his business leadership as the responsible choice, while characterizing my military service as selfish pursuit of adventure at family expense. This framework had become integral to his self-concept and provided justification for his accumulated resentment. Challenging this narrative directly would likely trigger defensive responses that could prevent rational consideration of contradictory evidence. The communication strategy required acknowledging the legitimacy of Marcus's perspective, while gradually introducing information that expanded rather than contradicted his understanding of family dynamics. The objective was not to prove Marcus wrong about his own contributions or sacrifices, but to demonstrate that our father had appreciated both forms of service while working to help us understand each other's choices. Military leadership training had emphasized that successful persuasion required establishing common ground before introducing contentious information. The documents revealed that our father had explicitly recognized the value of Marcus's business leadership and community commitment, providing foundation for conversation that began with validation rather than contradiction of his perspective. The timing considerations involved recognizing that Marcus was experiencing grief and stress related to our father's death, estate settlement responsibilities, and the pressure of managing business operations without paternal guidance. These emotional factors would influence his receptivity to new information and his capacity for processing complex family dynamics. Strategic communication required sensitivity to his psychological state, while maintaining focus on long-term relationship objectives. The environmental factors included the physical setting where our conversation would occur, the presence or absence of distractions, and the time allocation that would allow thorough discussion without creating pressure for immediate conclusions. Military operations required careful attention to environmental conditions that could influence mission success, and family communication deserved the same systematic consideration. I decided to approach Marcus during his evening routine when he typically reviewed the day's accomplishments and planned tomorrow's activities. This timing would align with his natural inclination toward reflection and future-oriented thinking, while avoiding the morning pressure of immediate business responsibilities. This setting would be our father's study, where the documentary evidence could be shared in the context of our father's memory and values. The communication sequence involved 3 phases designed to build understanding progressively, rather than overwhelming Marcus with information that contradicted his established beliefs. The first phase would focus on sharing our father's explicit recognition of Marcus's contributions and the specific language he had used to describe the value of business leadership and community service. The second phase would introduce our father's perspective on military service, while emphasizing his recognition that both forms of service required similar values of courage, sacrifice, and commitment to helping others. This approach would position military and business leadership as complementary, rather than competing forms of contribution to family and community welfare. The third phase would address the specific misunderstandings that had created tension between us, including our father's efforts to help Marcus understand military service and his financial planning to support my post-military transition. This information would demonstrate that our father had been actively working to bridge our differences, rather than choosing between competing priorities. The risk assessment identified several potential negative outcomes that required mitigation strategies. Marcus might interpret our father's support for my military service as evidence of favoritism that had been concealed during his lifetime. This interpretation could intensify rather than reduce his resentment and create additional barriers to family reconciliation. Alternative risk scenarios included Marcus dismissing the documentary evidence as irrelevant to current family relationships, or interpreting our father's dual support as confirmation that the family had been divided by competing loyalties. These responses would require adaptive communication strategies that addressed underlying emotional concerns rather than focusing exclusively on factual information. The mitigation approaches involved emphasizing our father's consistent recognition of both forms of service, while acknowledging the legitimate frustrations that Marcus had experienced during periods of my absence. The objective was to validate his emotional experience while providing context that explained, rather than minimize, the challenges he had faced. Military leadership had taught me that successful communication required adapting message delivery to the receiver's preferred learning style and decision-making processes. Marcus's business background suggested that he would respond most effectively to evidence-based arguments that included specific examples and practical implications rather than abstract principles or emotional appeals. The presentation strategy involved organizing the documentary evidence according to themes that Marcus could evaluate systematically, allowing him to reach conclusions through his own analysis, rather than accepting my interpretations of our father's intentions. This approach would respect his analytical capabilities while providing information that supported more nuanced understanding of family dynamics. This strategic decision also required considering the long-term implications of sharing this information with Marcus. The conversation would either establish foundation for improved family relationships or create new sources of conflict that could permanently damage our connection. The risk of failure was significant, but the potential benefits of successful communication justified accepting that risk. Military service had demonstrated that meaningful achievements often required accepting calculated risks when potential positive outcomes exceeded the costs of maintaining unsatisfactory status quo conditions. Our current family relationship was characterized by unresolved tensions that affected both of us negatively and would likely continue deteriorating without intervention. The decision to proceed with full disclosure reflected confidence in Marcus's fundamental character and his capacity for growth when provided with complete information. Despite years of accumulated resentment, he had demonstrated integrity, intelligence, and genuine concern for family welfare that suggested potential for positive response to evidence that challenged his assumptions. The strategic framework also included contingency planning for various response scenarios that Marcus might display during our conversation. His initial reaction could range from skepticism and defensive rejection to emotional processing that required time for integration. Each possible response would require different follow-up approaches that maintained strategic patience, while supporting his psychological adjustment to new information. The communication strategy incorporated lessons learned from years of military briefings, where complex information had to be conveyed to diverse audiences with different backgrounds and priorities. The most effective presentations combined logical organization with emotional authenticity, allowing receivers to engage both intellectually and personally with material that could influence important decisions. As evening approached and Marcus completed his daily business responsibilities, I prepared for a conversation that would either bridge years of misunderstanding or create new complications that could affect our relationship permanently. The strategic decision was complete, but its implementation would test everything I had learned about communication, leadership, and the delicate balance between honesty and tact that effective family relationships require. The documents were organized according to themes that would allow systematic presentation without overwhelming Marcus with information. The conversation would begin with validation of his perspective and contributions before expanding to include broader family dynamics that our father had understood but not successfully communicated during his lifetime. The strategic decision represented my commitment to applying military leadership principles to family challenges, demonstrating that the analytical and communication skills developed through service could create value in civilian contexts. The outcome would determine whether professional competencies could translate effectively to personal relationships that required different but equally demanding forms of courage and strategic thinking. The evening conversation began in our father's study at precisely 8 o'clock, when Marcus typically concluded his review of daily business operations and shifted his attention to family matters. I had arranged the documentary evidence according to the strategic framework developed during my afternoon planning session, organizing materials to support systematic presentation rather than overwhelming Marcus with information that contradicted his established beliefs about family priorities. Marcus entered the study carrying his usual evening coffee and wearing the expression of someone prepared for routine estate settlement discussions. His posture reflected the controlled tension that had characterized our interactions since my return home, suggesting expectation of conflict rather than collaborative problem-solving. The challenge involved transforming this defensive mindset into receptivity for information that could fundamentally alter his understanding of family dynamics. Marcus, I discovered some materials in Dad's filing cabinet that provide insights into his perspective on our respective careers and family relationships. I began, selecting language that emphasized discovery rather than contradiction of his existing beliefs. These documents reveal aspects of his thinking that he apparently never shared directly with either of us. The initial presentation focused on materials that validated Marcus's contributions and demonstrated our father's explicit recognition of his business leadership and community service. I shared the correspondence where our father had described Marcus's management capabilities, his dedication to maintaining local employment, and his assumption of family responsibilities during periods when military deployments prevented my direct participation. Marcus accepted the documents with cautious interest, reading carefully through materials that confirmed his value within the family structure. His expression gradually shifted from defensive preparation to genuine curiosity as he encountered specific language that our father had used to describe his achievements and contributions. The validation provided foundation for more challenging information that would follow in subsequent phases of the presentation. Dad understood the pressures you faced in managing the business while handling family responsibilities that I could not share during deployments. I continued, maintaining focus on acknowledgement rather than justification of my own choices. These notes indicate his appreciation for sacrifices that often went unrecognized because they appeared routine rather than extraordinary. The second document category included our father's analysis of different forms of service and his recognition that both business leadership and military service required similar fundamental values. Marcus read through materials that positioned his contributions as essential elements of American prosperity, rather than secondary alternatives to military service. This framing expanded his understanding of service, without diminishing the significance of his own choices. Marcus's reaction to this initial information demonstrated the psychological shift that strategic communication could achieve when properly implemented. His defensive posture relaxed, as he encountered evidence that contradicted his assumption that our father had viewed military service as superior to business leadership. The documents revealed instead a more nuanced perspective that appreciated both forms of contribution, while recognizing their different requirements and challenges. I never realized Dad thought about these distinctions so systematically, Marcus said, looking up from the documents with an expression that combined surprise with reassessment of long-held assumptions. He never shared these perspectives during our conversations about your military career. The presentation moved to the second phase, which introduced our father's knowledge of my military service while maintaining emphasis on his recognition that both forms of service reflected similar underlying values. I shared the correspondence that revealed his detailed understanding of my operational responsibilities and his informed appreciation for the leadership challenges involved in modern military missions. Marcus read through materials that described specific aspects of my service that our father had researched independently, including tactical operations, leadership responsibilities, and the strategic significance of missions like Operation Thunderstrike. The documents revealed that our father's support for my military career had been based on comprehensive understanding rather than abstract patriotic sentiment. The presentation included our father's attempts to educate Marcus about military service through articles and explanations that had apparently been ineffective during his lifetime. The materials demonstrated his recognition that conflict between his children reflected communication failures rather than fundamental disagreements about values or priorities. Marcus studied the unsent letter that our father had drafted to explain the complementary nature of different service forms and the importance of mutual recognition between family members who had chosen different paths. His reaction to this material indicated emotional processing that suggested potential for perspective change rather than defensive rejection of challenging information. Dad was trying to help me understand your service while validating my own contributions, Marcus said slowly, his tone reflecting reconsideration of family dynamics that he had previously interpreted through different frameworks. He recognized that our conflict was creating problems that affected the entire family structure. The third phase addressed specific misunderstandings that had created tension between us, including our father's financial planning for my post-military transition and his efforts to build community appreciation for contemporary military service. The trust fund documentation demonstrated practical support that contradicted Marcus's belief that our father viewed military service as impractical or economically disadvantageous. Marcus examined the financial planning materials with the analytical attention that his business background had developed. The documentation revealed sophisticated understanding of military career transitions and civilian opportunities that would utilize leadership skills developed through service. Our father's planning had considered various scenarios for my post-military career with the same systematic approach that Marcus applied to business development. The presentation concluded with materials that revealed our father's planning for community recognition of my military achievements through educational events that would have explained modern military operations to Cedar Falls residents. The planned celebration would have addressed the community understanding gap that had contributed to lack of appreciation for military service in contemporary contexts. Marcus's reaction to this final category of information demonstrated the comprehensive impact that strategic presentation could achieve when information was organized to support rather than challenge existing beliefs. Rather than feeling threatened by evidence of our father's support for my military career, he appeared to understand the broader framework that had motivated our father's dual recognition of both forms of service. Dad was working toward family reconciliation that he never achieved during his lifetime, Marcus said, setting down the final document and meeting my eyes directly for the first time since my return home. He understood both of our perspectives better than either of us realized, and he was trying to bridge differences that we had allowed to divide the family. The immediate response indicated successful communication that had achieved the primary objective of expanding Marcus's understanding without creating defensive reactions or intensified resentment. The strategic presentation had provided foundation for productive dialogue about family relationships and the possibility of moving beyond accumulated grievances toward mutual recognition and support. Marcus's body language shifted from defensive tension to engaged consideration as he processed the implications of our father's dual support and his efforts to facilitate understanding between his children. The documents had revealed a more complex family dynamic than either of us had recognized, with our father serving as an unsuccessful mediator who had understood both perspectives while failing to communicate his insights effectively. Sarah, I need to apologize for assumptions I made about Dad's priorities and your motivations for military service, Marcus continued, his tone carrying the sincerity that characterized his most genuine communications. These materials reveal a family dynamic that I completely misunderstood, and I projected my own frustrations onto situations that were more complex than I recognized. The success of the initial presentation created opportunity for deeper conversation about family relationships and the possibility of developing new approaches that honored both perspectives while avoiding the conflicts that had divided us. The strategic communication had achieved its primary objective of creating receptivity for information that could transform our relationship if properly developed through continued dialogue. Marcus began asking questions about specific aspects of my military service that he had never previously shown interest in understanding. His inquiries demonstrated genuine curiosity rather than defensive skepticism, suggesting that the presentation had created intellectual and emotional space for learning about experiences that had previously seemed threatening or irrelevant to family relationships. The conversation extended beyond the planned presentation as Marcus shared his own perspectives on business challenges and community responsibilities that I had never fully appreciated. The exchange revealed that both of us had developed expertise and insights that could benefit from sharing rather than competition for family recognition and support. The evening concluded with agreement to continue conversations that would explore possibilities for applying our different but complementary skills to challenges that neither of us could address effectively alone. The initial presentation had achieved its strategic objective of creating foundation for family reconciliation, while demonstrating that professional communication skills could transform personal relationships when applied with appropriate sensitivity and systematic planning. The success of truth delivered with precision and purpose had opened pathways for family healing that would be tested in subsequent interactions, but the foundation had been established for moving beyond accumulated resentments toward mutual understanding and collaborative problem-solving that honored both military service and business leadership as valuable contributions to family and community welfare. The morning following our productive evening conversation brought developments that demonstrated how external pressures could undermine family reconciliation despite genuine progress in understanding and communication. Marcus had left early for a construction site meeting, carrying with him what appeared to be renewed appreciation for our father's perspective and willingness to reconsider long-held assumptions about military service and family priorities. I spent the morning hours organizing additional estate documents and preparing for meetings with the family attorney regarding property transfers and business succession planning. The administrative requirements following our father's death created complex legal and financial considerations that required careful coordination between Marcus and myself as co-executors of the estate. The first indication of complications arose when Marcus returned from his construction site visit with visible agitation that contrasted sharply with his receptive mood during our previous evening's discussion. His body language demonstrated the tension and defensiveness that had characterized our interactions before sharing our father's documentary evidence, suggesting that external influences had reactivated his resistance to family reconciliation. "Sarah, we need to discuss some concerns that were raised about your military situation during my meeting with the Henderson construction project supervisors," Marcus announced as he entered the kitchen where I was reviewing insurance documents. His tone carried the formal distance that indicated preparation for confrontation rather than collaborative problem-solving. The Henderson project represented one of Mitchell Construction's largest current contracts, involving renovation of a municipal building that employed 12 of Marcus's workers and generated significant revenue for the company. The project supervisors included several community leaders whose opinions carried substantial influence regarding local business relationships and social dynamics. Marcus continued with information that revealed the source of his renewed resistance. "Tom Henderson mentioned that he heard rumors about your military service involving controversial operations that might reflect negatively on our family's reputation in the community. He suggested that military personnel who participate in overseas combat operations sometimes engage in activities that create political complications. The nature of these concerns indicated that community members lacked accurate information about modern military operations and had developed misconceptions based on media coverage or outdated assumptions about combat operations. The rumors apparently suggested that my service record included activities that could create social or political controversy if they became public knowledge." Marcus's reaction to these community concerns demonstrated how external pressures could override personal understanding and family loyalty when business relationships were perceived to be at risk. His livelihood depended on maintaining positive relationships with clients and community leaders who controlled construction contracts and employment opportunities for local residents. "Marcus, I can provide detailed information about my service record and operational responsibilities if you have specific concerns about my conduct or mission activities," I responded, recognizing that his business anxiety required factual clarification rather than emotional reassurance. "Military operations are conducted according to strict legal and ethical guidelines that ensure compliance with international law and American values." The conversation revealed that Marcus's renewed resistance reflected legitimate concerns about how my military service might affect his business operations and community relationships, rather than personal rejection of our father's perspective or military service principles. His position as a local business leader created vulnerabilities to community opinion that military personnel typically did not face in their professional environments. The community concerns appeared to originate from Tom Henderson's brother-in-law, who had served briefly in the National Guard during the 1990s and claimed expertise regarding military operations based on limited experience that predated contemporary combat environments. His opinions about modern military service were apparently influenced by political perspectives and media coverage, rather than direct knowledge of current operational realities. Marcus explained that Henderson had questioned whether military personnel who participated in Middle Eastern operations could be trusted with community leadership responsibilities or family business management. These concerns reflected broader political divisions regarding American military involvement overseas and the appropriateness of combat operations in civilian-populated areas. The skeptical reception represented a significant challenge to family reconciliation, because it introduced external stakeholders who could influence Marcus's willingness to support my transition to civilian career opportunities within the Cedar Falls community. Business relationships that sustained his livelihood could be affected by community perceptions of military service that were based on incomplete or inaccurate information. The situation required strategic response that addressed community concerns while maintaining the progress achieved through our previous evening's conversation. Military training had prepared me for situations where operational success required managing multiple stakeholder perspectives and addressing misinformation that could undermine mission effectiveness. I proposed organizing a community presentation that would provide accurate information about contemporary military operations and address misconceptions that were creating concerns about military service. The presentation would explain the legal frameworks, ethical guidelines, and civilian protection measures that govern modern combat operations, while demonstrating how military training develops leadership skills that benefit civilian organizations. Marcus's reaction to this proposal revealed the complexity of his position as someone who had developed personal understanding of military service value while facing community pressure that questioned the appropriateness of military personnel in local leadership roles. His business success depended on maintaining relationships with clients who might view military experience as controversial rather than valuable. The conversation extended beyond immediate concerns about community perceptions to address broader questions about how military veterans transition to civilian careers in communities where military service is viewed with suspicion rather than appreciation. These challenges affected not only my own career prospects, but also other veterans who might face similar obstacles in gaining community acceptance and professional opportunities. Marcus acknowledged that his renewed resistance reflected external pressure rather than personal conviction, but he emphasized that his business responsibilities required careful consideration of community relationships that sustained employment for dozens of local residents. His position as a community leader created obligations that extended beyond family relationships to include broader stakeholder interests. The strategic challenge involved developing approaches that could address community concerns while maintaining family relationships and supporting successful civilian career transitions for military veterans. The solution required educational initiatives that could transform community understanding, rather than simply avoiding controversial topics or concealing military service records. I shared information about successful community education programs that other military personnel had implemented to address similar challenges in civilian communities. These programs typically involved partnerships with local organizations, presentations at community events, and collaboration with business leaders who could demonstrate the practical value of military training for civilian applications. Marcus expressed willingness to consider community education approaches if they could be designed to address specific concerns raised by business partners, while avoiding political controversies that might create additional complications for local relationships. His support would be essential for implementing any community outreach initiatives that required local business or political endorsement. The afternoon discussion revealed that skeptical reception reflected broader community dynamics rather than personal rejection of military service or family reconciliation. The challenge involved transforming community understanding through strategic communication that addressed legitimate concerns while demonstrating the practical value of military experience for civilian applications. Marcus agreed to facilitate introductory meetings with community leaders who could provide insights into local concerns and suggest approaches that might be effective for addressing misconceptions about military service. These conversations would provide foundation for developing community education initiatives that could benefit not only my own career transition, but also other veterans who might face similar challenges. The skeptical reception had tested the progress achieved through family reconciliation, while revealing external challenges that required strategic response beyond personal relationship management. The situation demonstrated how individual achievements could be affected by community perceptions that were based on incomplete information rather than direct knowledge of military service realities. The experience reinforced lessons learned through military service about the importance of strategic communication in managing multiple stakeholder perspectives while maintaining focus on long-term objectives. The challenges faced by military veterans in civilian communities required sustained effort to transform understanding, rather than simply accepting limitations imposed by misconceptions or political divisions. The evening concluded with renewed commitment to family relationships combined with recognition that successful civilian career transition would require addressing community concerns through educational initiatives that demonstrated rather than simply described the value of military training for civilian applications. The skeptical reception had revealed obstacles that could be overcome through strategic patience and systematic community engagement. The challenge of addressing community misconceptions about military service required systematic development of supporting evidence that could withstand scrutiny from skeptical stakeholders, while demonstrating the practical value of military training for civilian applications. Military operations had taught me that credibility depended not only on the accuracy of information presented, but also on the comprehensiveness of documentation and the reliability of sources that validated claims about operational effectiveness and leadership performance. The morning following Marcus's revelation about community concerns, I initiated a comprehensive documentation project designed to compile verifiable evidence about my military service record, operational achievements, and leadership capabilities that could address specific questions raised by local business leaders. The objective involved creating a presentation portfolio that would demonstrate rather than simply assert the value of military experience for civilian career applications. The first component required obtaining official documentation from military personnel records that would provide authoritative verification of service achievements, promotion history, and performance evaluations. Military records maintain detailed documentation of leadership responsibilities, training completions, and operational participation that could demonstrate competence and reliability to civilian employers who lacked familiarity with military performance standards. I contacted the Army Human Resources Command to request comprehensive copies of my official military personnel file, which contained performance evaluations, award citations, training records, and assignment histories that documented 4 years of progressive leadership responsibility. These official documents would provide third-party verification of achievements that could not be disputed by skeptics who questioned the accuracy of personal claims about military service. The personnel file documentation included officer evaluation reports that provided detailed assessments of my leadership performance during various assignments and deployments. These evaluations contained specific examples of tactical decision-making, personnel management, and operational achievements that demonstrated transferable skills relevant to civilian business leadership. The evaluations were conducted by senior officers who had observed my performance under operational conditions and could provide authoritative assessment of leadership capabilities. The second component involved documenting the specific details of Operation Thunderstrike that had led to my Medal of Honor recommendation. This documentation required careful balance between providing sufficient detail to demonstrate operational significance, while maintaining appropriate security considerations regarding classified tactical information and ongoing operational security requirements. I prepared a comprehensive operational summary that explained the strategic context, tactical challenges, and leadership decisions involved in Operation Thunderstrike without revealing classified information that could compromise future military operations. The summary included details about civilian casualty prevention, coordination with local authorities, and post-operation humanitarian assistance that demonstrated commitment to protecting innocent populations while accomplishing military objectives. The operational documentation included statements from soldiers who had served under my command during Operation Thunderstrike, providing first-person testimony about leadership performance under extreme pressure. These statements were obtained through official channels and included verification of the soldiers' identities and service records to ensure authenticity and credibility for civilian audiences, who might question the reliability of military personnel testimony. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, who had served as my senior non-commissioned officer during Operation Thunderstrike, provided detailed testimony about tactical decision-making and personnel management during the operation. Her statement included specific examples of how my leadership had prevented civilian casualties while maintaining unit cohesion under intense combat conditions. Gonzalez's 20-year military career and multiple combat deployments provided credibility that would be recognized by civilian audiences evaluating military leadership claims. Corporal James Thompson, who had been wounded during Operation Thunderstrike while executing evacuation operations under my command, provided testimony about my commitment to soldier welfare and willingness to accept personal risk to protect subordinate personnel. Thompson's statement described how my tactical decisions had prioritized soldier safety while accomplishing mission objectives, demonstrating leadership principles that would be valued in civilian organizational contexts. The third component required developing comprehensive analysis of how military training and experience translated to civilian career applications, particularly in business management and community leadership roles. This analysis needed to address specific concerns that had been raised about military personnel, while demonstrating positive contributions that veterans could make to civilian organizations and community development. I researched successful veteran transition programs that had been implemented in communities similar to Cedar Falls, identifying best practices and measurable outcomes that demonstrated the positive impact of military veterans in civilian leadership roles. This research provided empirical evidence that contradicted negative stereotypes, while offering practical frameworks for veteran integration into local business and community organizations. The research included case studies of military officers who had successfully transitioned to civilian business leadership roles, demonstrating how combat experience and military training had enhanced rather than limited their effectiveness in corporate environments. These case studies provided concrete examples of skill transfer and performance improvement that could address concerns about the relevance of military experience for civilian applications. Harvard Business School research on veteran employment outcomes provided academic validation of military leadership training effectiveness in civilian contexts. The research demonstrated that military officers typically outperformed their civilian counterparts in areas such as crisis management, team leadership, and strategic planning, due to training and experience that civilian educational programs could not replicate. The fourth component involved obtaining testimonials from civilian professionals who had worked with military personnel and could provide authoritative assessment of military training value for civilian applications. These testimonials would carry particular weight with business leaders who shared similar backgrounds and could relate to civilian perspectives on military personnel performance. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a management consultant who specialized in organizational leadership development, provided detailed analysis of military leadership training programs and their effectiveness for developing civilian management capabilities. Her assessment included comparison of military and civilian leadership development approaches, demonstrating superior preparation that military training provided for managing complex organizations under pressure. Richard Chen, Chief Executive Officer of Midwest Industrial Solutions, provided testimony about his experience employing military veterans in senior management positions. His statement included specific examples of how military training had enhanced organizational performance while addressing common concerns about veteran integration into civilian corporate environments. Chen's 30-year career in industrial management provided credibility with business leaders who might be considering veteran employment. The fifth component required developing community outreach strategies that could transform local understanding of military service, while addressing specific concerns that had been raised by business leaders. These strategies needed to provide educational opportunities that would demonstrate, rather than simply describe, the value of military experience for community development and business applications. I proposed organizing a veteran recognition event that would provide opportunities for community members to interact directly with military personnel and learn about contemporary military operations through presentations and demonstrations. The event would feature local veterans from various service branches and career fields, demonstrating the diversity of military experience and its applications to civilian contexts. The event planning included coordination with the Cedar Falls Veterans of Foreign Wars organization, which maintained relationships with dozens of local veterans who could participate in community education initiatives. The VFW leadership expressed enthusiasm for programs that could improve community understanding of military service while supporting veteran transition to civilian careers. Mayor Patricia Williams agreed to provide municipal support for veteran recognition events that could enhance community appreciation for military service while addressing misconceptions that created barriers to veteran employment and civic participation. The municipal endorsement would provide official credibility for educational initiatives while demonstrating community leadership support for veteran integration programs. The sixth component involved developing strategic partnerships with local business leaders who could serve as advocates for veteran employment and community integration. These partnerships would provide platforms for demonstrating military training value while building coalitions of support that could overcome resistance from skeptical stakeholders. Marcus facilitated introductory meetings with construction industry leaders who could evaluate the relevance of military logistics and project management experience for civilian construction operations. These meetings provided opportunities to demonstrate how military training and resource coordination, personnel management, and deadline-driven project completion translated directly to construction industry requirements. The evidence compilation project required 3 weeks of systematic documentation gathering, research analysis, and stakeholder outreach that created comprehensive foundation for addressing community concerns about military service. The resulting portfolio contained official documentation, third-party verification, academic research, professional testimonials, and strategic implementation plans that could withstand scrutiny from skeptical audiences, while demonstrating clear value propositions for veteran employment and community integration. The supporting evidence phase established credible foundation for community education initiatives, while providing Marcus with resources that could address business partner concerns and facilitate my transition to civilian career opportunities within the Cedar Falls community. The comprehensive documentation demonstrated that military service provided valuable preparation for civilian leadership roles rather than creating obstacles to community integration and business success. The development of strategic partnerships within the Cedar Falls community required systematic identification of stakeholders who possessed both the influence to shape public opinion and the motivation to support initiatives that would benefit military veterans and community development. Military operations had demonstrated that sustainable success required building coalitions of support that extended beyond immediate tactical objectives, to include broader strategic relationships that could provide resources, credibility, and long-term advocacy for important initiatives. The alliance-building process began with comprehensive stakeholder analysis that identified key community leaders across various sectors, including business, education, civic organizations, and religious institutions. Each potential partner possessed different capabilities, spheres of influence, and motivational factors that would determine their willingness to support veteran integration initiatives and community education programs addressing military service misconceptions. The business sector analysis revealed that several prominent Cedar Falls entrepreneurs had military backgrounds or family connections to military service that created natural affinity for veteran support initiatives. These business leaders possessed the credibility and resources necessary to influence community opinion while providing practical opportunities for veteran employment and career development that could demonstrate the value of military training in civilian applications. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, owner of Cedar Falls Medical Associates and former Navy corpsman, emerged as a potential key ally, whose medical practice employed 43 local residents, and whose professional reputation provided significant community influence. His military background created personal understanding of service challenges and veteran transition issues, while his business success demonstrated the practical applications of military training in civilian professional contexts. Rodriguez expressed enthusiasm for community education initiatives that would address misconceptions about military service while supporting veteran integration into local business environments. His medical practice had successfully employed several military veterans in administrative and technical positions, providing concrete examples of how military training enhanced rather than limited civilian career performance. The practice had achieved superior patient satisfaction ratings and operational efficiency metrics that could be attributed partly to the discipline and systematic approaches that military veterans brought to healthcare administration. Elizabeth Chen, president of Cedar Falls Chamber of Commerce and daughter of a Vietnam veteran, possessed extensive networks throughout the regional business community and demonstrated commitment to workforce development initiatives that supported economic growth. Her position provided access to business leaders across multiple industries, while her family military connection created personal motivation for supporting veteran transition programs. Chen proposed organizing a comprehensive business summit that would feature presentations on veteran employment benefits, case studies of successful military to civilian career transitions, and practical workshops for business leaders interested in recruiting and integrating military veterans into their organizations. The summit would provide educational opportunities that addressed employer concerns, while demonstrating the competitive advantages that veteran employees could provide to local businesses. The educational sector offered opportunities for partnerships with institutions that possessed research capabilities and community credibility necessary for developing evidence-based approaches to veteran integration and military service education. These partnerships would provide academic validation for community education initiatives while creating sustainable programs that could continue beyond initial implementation phases. Dr. Sarah Johnson, Dean of Business Administration at Cedar Falls Community College, demonstrated strong interest in developing veteran transition programs that would provide bridge training between military experience and civilian career requirements. The college had recently received federal grants for workforce development initiatives that could be expanded to include specialized programs for military veterans seeking civilian employment opportunities. Johnson proposed creating a comprehensive veteran business leadership program that would combine military leadership experience with civilian business education, providing credentials that would be recognized by local employers, while addressing specific skill gaps that might exist in areas such as civilian financial management, marketing strategies, and regulatory compliance. The program would demonstrate institutional commitment to veteran support while providing practical career development opportunities. Professor James Martinez, director of the college's public administration program and retired Army colonel, possessed both academic expertise and military experience that would provide exceptional credibility for community education initiatives. His research focus on organizational leadership and public policy had produced several academic publications that examined the effectiveness of military leadership training for civilian applications. Martinez offered to conduct comprehensive research on veteran integration outcomes in communities similar to Cedar Falls, providing empirical evidence that would support policy recommendations and resource allocation decisions. His academic credentials would carry significant weight with community leaders who required scholarly validation for initiatives that involved public resources or policy changes. The civic organizations sector included established groups that possessed community networks and volunteer resources necessary for implementing large-scale education and outreach programs. These organizations had demonstrated track records of successful community initiatives while maintaining broad public support that could be leveraged for veteran integration programs. The Cedar Falls Rotary Club, with membership including prominent business leaders, healthcare professionals, and retired executives, provided access to influential community members who possessed both resources and motivation for supporting initiatives that enhanced community development and economic growth. The club's established commitment to community service created natural alignment with veteran support objectives. Rotary President Margaret Thompson expressed interest in adopting veteran integration as a major club initiative that would provide sustained support for education programs, employment assistance, and community recognition events. The club's resources could fund research initiatives, sponsor community events, and provide mentorship programs that would support veteran transitions while demonstrating community appreciation for military service. The Cedar Falls Lions Club offered complementary capabilities that focused on direct service provision and community event organization. The club's experience with large-scale community events and fundraising activities could provide practical support for veteran recognition programs and educational initiatives that required extensive coordination and resource management. Religious institution partnerships provided access to community members across demographic and socioeconomic segments, while offering venues and volunteer networks that could support comprehensive outreach programs. These partnerships were particularly important for addressing concerns among community members who might not participate in business or civic organization activities. Pastor Robert Williams of Cedar Falls United Methodist Church, whose congregation included numerous military families and veterans, offered church facilities for community education events while providing volunteer coordination for outreach programs. The church's established community service programs could be expanded to include veteran support services that addressed transition challenges and integration obstacles. The Interfaith Coalition, representing various religious denominations in Cedar Falls, expressed collective interest in supporting veteran integration initiatives as part of their broader community service missions. This coalition could provide comprehensive community outreach that reached residents who might not otherwise participate in secular education programs or business-sponsored events. The alliance-building process also required addressing potential opposition from community members who maintained skeptical perspectives about military service or veteran integration programs. Strategic relationship building involved identifying concerns and developing responses that acknowledged legitimate questions, while providing factual information that could transform understanding rather than simply dismissing opposing viewpoints. Marcus facilitated meetings with construction industry leaders who had initially expressed concerns about military personnel and civilian leadership roles. These conversations provided opportunities to address specific misconceptions while demonstrating how military logistics and project management experience translated directly to construction industry requirements. The meetings revealed that much of the skepticism resulted from limited exposure to contemporary military operations rather than fundamental opposition to veteran employment. Tom Henderson, whose initial concerns had created challenges for family reconciliation, agreed to participate in educational presentations that would provide accurate information about modern military operations and veteran transition support programs. His willingness to engage with factual information rather than maintaining positions based on incomplete knowledge demonstrated the potential for transforming community understanding through systematic education and relationship building. The alliance-building phase established comprehensive support networks that included business leaders, educational institutions, civic organizations, and religious communities working together to address veteran integration challenges while supporting community development objectives. These partnerships provided the resources, credibility, and sustained commitment necessary for implementing long-term programs that would benefit not only individual veterans, but also the broader community through enhanced workforce capabilities and economic development opportunities. The strategic partnerships created foundation for comprehensive community transformation that would address misconceptions about military service, while demonstrating the practical value of veteran integration for local business success and community prosperity. The alliance-building process had established broad-based support that could overcome initial skepticism, while providing sustainable resources for continued veteran support and community education initiatives. The momentum generated through strategic alliance building encountered systematic opposition that emerged as community education initiatives began to gain visibility and support throughout Cedar Falls. The resistance manifested through coordinated efforts by individuals who viewed veteran integration programs as threats to existing social hierarchies and economic arrangements that had served their interests for decades. Military operations had prepared me to anticipate that successful initiatives would generate opposition from stakeholders who benefited from maintaining current conditions, but the intensity and sophistication of the resistance exceeded initial expectations. The escalation began with organized efforts to discredit the community education initiatives through misinformation campaigns that questioned both the necessity of veteran support programs and the appropriateness of military personnel in civilian leadership roles. These efforts were coordinated through informal networks of business owners and community leaders who possess significant influence over local economic opportunities and social dynamics. Robert Henderson, Tom Henderson's older brother and former Cedar Falls City Council member, emerged as the primary organizer of opposition efforts. His position as owner of Henderson Real Estate provided access to numerous business relationships and community connections that could be leveraged to create obstacles for veteran integration initiatives. Henderson possessed both the motivation and capability to organize resistance that could undermine community support while creating practical barriers to program implementation. Henderson's opposition reflected deeper concerns about maintaining traditional power structures within Cedar Falls that had historically excluded military veterans from prominent community leadership roles. The veteran integration initiatives represented potential changes to established social hierarchies that had concentrated influence among families and businesses that had operated within the community for multiple generations without external challenges. The resistance strategy involved questioning the competence and reliability of military personnel for civilian responsibilities, while suggesting that veteran support programs represented unnecessary expenditures of community resources that could be better allocated to traditional economic development initiatives. These arguments were designed to appeal to fiscal conservatives and business leaders who prioritized immediate economic considerations over social integration objectives. Henderson organized a series of informal meetings with business owners and civic leaders that were presented as discussions about community development priorities, but actually functioned as opposition organizing sessions. These meetings provided platforms for sharing negative information about military personnel, while building consensus among influential stakeholders who could create obstacles for veteran integration programs through their business decisions and community influence. The misinformation campaign included circulation of materials that misrepresented military operations and veteran employment outcomes through selective quotation of negative incidents, and statistical manipulation that emphasized problems while minimizing successes. These materials were distributed through business networks and community organizations that possessed credibility with residents who lacked direct knowledge of military service realities. Marcus discovered the organized opposition through conversations with construction industry colleagues who had been contacted by Henderson representatives seeking support for efforts to prevent veteran integration programs from receiving community resources or official endorsement. The opposition efforts specifically targeted Marcus as someone whose business relationships could be influenced by community pressure regarding his support for military-related initiatives. The resistance escalation created significant pressure on Marcus to distance himself from veteran support efforts in order to protect his business relationships and maintain his position within the construction industry network. Henderson's influence over municipal construction contracts represented direct economic threats that could affect Mitchell Construction's revenue and employment capacity for dozens of local workers. Marcus faced difficult choices between supporting family reconciliation and veteran integration initiatives that aligned with our father's values, and protecting his business interests from organized opposition that possessed the capability to create substantial economic consequences. The pressure represented exactly the kind of forced choice that military families often confronted when service obligations conflicted with civilian community expectations. The opposition efforts included attempts to prevent educational institutions from implementing veteran transition programs through pressure on college administrators and school board members who were vulnerable to community criticism and political retaliation. These efforts targeted the academic credibility of veteran integration research while questioning the appropriateness of using educational resources for specialized programs that served limited populations. Dr. Sarah Johnson encountered resistance from college board members who had been contacted by opposition organizers, questioning the fiscal responsibility of expanding veteran programs when general enrollment required attention and resources. The pressure was applied through informal conversations and social settings rather than formal opposition that would create public controversy and potential backlash from veteran support constituencies. Professor James Martinez faced similar challenges through attempts to undermine his research credibility and academic standing within the college community. Opposition efforts focused on questioning his objectivity regarding military service issues while suggesting that his research was biased by personal military experience rather than academic rigor and empirical methodology. The resistance escalation extended to civic organizations that had expressed support for veteran integration initiatives. Rotary Club and Lions Club members received informal pressure from business associates and social contacts who questioned the appropriateness of adopting veteran support as major organizational priorities, when traditional community service activities required continued attention and resources. Margaret Thompson encountered opposition from Rotary Club members, who argued that veteran integration programs represented political activities that were inappropriate for civic organizations committed to nonpartisan community service. The opposition was framed as concern for organizational neutrality rather than direct criticism of military service, but the effect was to create internal divisions that could prevent effective program implementation. The religious institution partnerships faced resistance from congregation members who had been influenced by misinformation campaigns, questioning the compatibility of military service with Christian values and community harmony. These efforts were particularly sophisticated because they appealed to religious principles while misrepresenting military operational realities and ethical frameworks. Pastor Robert Williams received complaints from church members who had been contacted by opposition organizers, suggesting that military personnel were inappropriate role models for community leadership due to involvement in overseas combat operations. The complaints were presented as religious objections to violence rather than political opposition to veteran integration, making them more difficult to address through factual information and community dialogue. The escalated resistance revealed the sophisticated understanding of community dynamics and influence networks that opposition organizers possessed. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation that could generate sympathy for veteran integration initiatives, the resistance operated through indirect pressure and informal influence that created obstacles without producing visible controversies that might mobilize counter-opposition. The strategic challenge involved responding to resistance that operated below the threshold of public controversy, while creating practical barriers to program implementation through economic pressure and social influence. Military counterintelligence training had prepared me to recognize and respond to information warfare techniques, but applying these skills in civilian community contexts required adaptation to different operational environments and stakeholder relationships. The resistance escalation also revealed the vulnerability of community coalition building to organized opposition that possessed superior resources and established influence networks. The veteran integration initiatives required sustained community support that could be undermined by economic pressure and social intimidation that targeted individual participants rather than confronting the programs directly. Marcus provided intelligence about opposition strategies and tactics through his business relationships and community connections. His position within the construction industry provided access to information about resistance organizing efforts, while his commitment to family reconciliation motivated him to share intelligence that could inform strategic responses to escalating opposition. The resistance escalation demonstrated that community transformation initiatives required anticipation of organized opposition and development of defensive strategies that could protect individual participants while maintaining program momentum despite systematic efforts to create obstacles and undermine support. The escalation phase tested the resilience of community partnerships while revealing the intensity of resistance that veteran integration efforts could generate among stakeholders who benefited from maintaining existing social and economic arrangements. The organized opposition represented a critical challenge that would determine whether veteran integration initiatives could overcome systematic resistance through superior organization and strategic persistence, or whether entrenched interests possessed sufficient influence to prevent community transformation despite broad-based support and compelling evidence of program benefits for economic development and community welfare. The escalated resistance from organized opposition required fundamental reassessment of strategic approaches and tactical implementation methods for advancing veteran integration initiatives within the Cedar Falls community. Military operational planning had demonstrated that effective leadership demanded flexibility in execution, while maintaining unwavering commitment to core objectives when encountering unexpected obstacles or sophisticated enemy countermeasures. The intelligence gathered through Marcus regarding opposition tactics and organization revealed that Robert Henderson's resistance network possessed superior knowledge of local power dynamics and influence mechanisms compared to the Veteran Support Coalition. Henderson's decades of community involvement had created comprehensive understanding of pressure points and vulnerability areas that could be exploited to undermine individual participants and organizational supporters of veteran integration programs. The strategic pivot required transitioning from broad-based community education approaches that were vulnerable to systematic undermining toward more targeted and defensible initiatives that could demonstrate tangible value while minimizing exposure to economic retaliation and social pressure. The revised strategy would prioritize measurable outcomes over widespread community transformation, focusing resources on achieving specific objectives that would establish credibility and momentum for future expansion. The first element of the strategic adjustment involved concentrating efforts on educational institutions, where academic freedom and institutional mission provided stronger protection against external pressure compared to business organizations or civic groups that were more vulnerable to economic intimidation. Professor Martinez and Dr. Johnson possessed tenure protections and institutional support that made them more resistant to opposition pressure than business leaders who depended on community relationships for their economic survival. The college-based veteran transition program offered opportunities to demonstrate measurable outcomes through structured educational delivery and employment placement metrics that would provide empirical evidence of program effectiveness. The academic environment allowed for rigorous documentation and third-party validation that would create stronger foundations for future expansion than subjective community assessments or opinion-based evaluations. Professor Martinez proposed expanding the veteran transition research beyond Cedar Falls to include regional analysis that would provide broader empirical context and reduce dependence on local political dynamics. The expanded research scope would engage academic networks and federal funding sources that possessed resources and credibility beyond the reach of local opposition efforts, while producing scholarship that could influence policy development at state and federal levels. The second strategic adjustment focused on developing direct relationships with individual business leaders who possessed both personal motivation and sufficient organizational independence to support veteran integration despite community pressure. These relationships would be cultivated through private meetings and confidential discussions, rather than public advocacy that could expose supporters to retaliation from organized opposition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.